Zambia's 60th independence is here. Are you ready to celebrate in style? Get your exclusive and wear your style of Zambia at 60 t-shirts and proudly stand out. Show your love for Zambia with a design that's bold, unique, and perfect for this special day. One shirt is just $40 or grab two for $70. It's the perfect way to share the pride with friends and family. Ready to order? It's easy. Send your payment via Zelle, +1 817 501 1615 or Cash App, $Pastor Nate. For questions, email us at zbtr2009@gmail.com. Don't wait, pre-order now, wear your style, and let's celebrate Zambia's freedom in style.
Good morning, good morning. I'm so excited to be here at Zambia Blog Talk Radio. We are excited to have a very special guest, Mr. Chisanga Puta Chekwe, and I'm so excited to share this space with him, and it's going to be a very interesting and engaging conversation. We shall be speaking on the subject, a history through the eyes of its leadership pillars. As Zambia celebrates 60 years, a look at the history through the eyes of its leadership pillars. I'd like to welcome into the studio, Mr. Chisanga Puta Chekwe. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you very much for that welcome.
Yes, sir. No, I am truly humbled. You know, I like to say you are one of our heroes in the nation of Zambia. You are a trailblazer, and I'm just excited to host you this morning. You know, I want to kind of stop a little bit at this poem and just get your reflections. You know what, sir? This morning I will not introduce you. You have such a illustrious CV vita, and I'm asking the audience that is listening in to Google and research you, because I believe that if we spend time there, we'll labor too long. All I'd say is that you're an amazing patriot, a great ambassador for our country, and an academic, a scholar, an entrepreneur, and a man of wisdom, a sage for the ages. I want to read you this poem, sir. Just a few lines from it, if that's okay.
And before you do that, let me just correct you on one thing. I've never seen myself as an academic.
You know what? After reading your book, I would call you then an accidental academic, because after reading some of your work, you truly are an academic. You know, I think an academic not by practice, but an academic by the things that you've done in your career. So the paradox of our time in history is that we have taller buildings, but shorter tempers, wider freeways, but narrower viewpoints. We spend more, but have less. We buy more, but enjoy it less. We have bigger houses and smaller families, more conveniences, but less time. We have more degrees, Mr. Puta, more degrees, but less sense, more knowledge, but less judgment, more experts, but more problems, more medicine, but less wellness. The author of this piece calls it the paradox of our time in history.
Yes. That describes the world, I think, reasonably accurately, but it also specifically describes Zambia quite well.
Wow. I thought you'd say that. describes the world and describes Zambia quite well. Well, let's go back home. You're growing up in Zambia. I'm so excited. You and I have something in common. Our lives both happen in the town of Chingola, the cleanest town in Zambia at the time, I believe. Please tell us about who Mr. Chisanga Puta Chekwe is, and just a little bit of your background, sir.
Well, a very ordinary person who has lived in extraordinary times, and that I have to confess that I am a privileged person. I bear that in mind all the time, and my hope is that with those privileges, I have comported myself well and done my duty and responsibility given that privilege. So, in short, really, I see myself as a very ordinary person who is extremely fortunate and who strives to use the advantages that one has to the full, not just for oneself, but for one's community and one's family, one's friends, one who tries to be not egocentric.
And I appreciate that. Just in the backstage, you and I had a conversation on why we seem to be so hung up on titles as a people. And I loved your commentary on the fact that maybe we are masking some insecurities. Why do I have to go by Dr. Musoma, and all that?
That's right.
I was like, ouch, when he said that, Sir,
no, but at least you have a legitimate PhD. There are people who get their PhDs from those unaccredited universities that advertise at the back of magazines. They'll offer you a PhD on payment of $200-300 and submission of an outline of an essay or something like that. And people go for it because of this obsession with titles.
Wow, talking about education. I'm talking to a Rhodes Scholar. Please speak to us on the moment you get that letter in the mail that you are about to be a Rhodes Scholar. What is going on through your mind?
I think it's your initial reaction is disbelief, and you feel very humbled because you think, there's so much competition for this scholarship. And, I wrote my essay, I did the interview, my background was scrutinized, and some wise people came, decided that I was worthy of the honor. So you really do feel very humbled. At the same time, I think that is the beginning of the realization of your duty and responsibilities. And I think you enter an era when your own comportment begins to change. You become more mindful of your duties and responsibilities because of this honor of being a Rhodes Scholar. You are mindful all the time that any one of your competitors, at least in the final stages, could have been a Rhodes Scholar. And because you are so mindful, you ask yourself, why me? And I think you then conclude that at the end of the day, the Rhodes Scholarship perhaps is a gift, because you really, people are competing at the edges. The people who succeed are not conspicuously more deserving than the ones who don't succeed. They just have that edge. And because of that, you really do begin to appreciate that this is a gift that must be used appropriately.
I love the humility aspects of what you're sharing. Most of us given such an opportunity sometimes to develop heirs, or we actually kind of just start to. I love what one of my friends says. We start to believe our own press. We read our own headlines, and so thank you for not reading your own press. So
well, I'll tell you a story about that. You're absolutely correct. There's a story from the States, and there was an interview for Rhodes Scholars, and one candidate went in and said, rather boastfully, "I am a self-made man." And the secretary of the committee was taking all these notes. And subsequently, when the report came out, it read something like this: Mr. Jones, that wasn't his name, Mr. Jones, appeared before the panel and immediately declared that he was a self-made man. He then proceeded to demonstrate that he was fond of worshiping his creator.
No way. Self-made man who's fond of worshiping his creator. Oh my goodness.
That's right.
Oh my gosh. What a contradiction. Talking about contradictions, I want to go back to, one thing I've enjoyed in knowing you is just your discipline. Fun fact is you're a man that jogs every day. Is that correct?
I work out. I go on the treadmill. I'll only jog if I'm in a place where there is no gym, but I go on the treadmill for at least 30 minutes, burning between 250 and 300 calories on Monday to Saturday. I take Sunday off.
So you have done this as a general practice throughout the course of your life?
Not really. No, I started running for recreation in my 30s, early 30s in London. So it's not, but for most of my life now, I've done that, yes.
Wow. No, it's really neat. I'm inspired. I just signed up for gym membership after our conversation this week, so the next time you see me, I'll be lean and trim, very lean. Well, sir, I wanted to humanize you because sometimes when we meet individuals such as yourself that are accomplished, there's a tendency to make leadership unavailable. And in our conversation today, as we discuss the pillars of the founding and the development of our country, I wanted to present, as you said in your own words, an ordinary man that has had the privilege of doing some extraordinary things. Could you start off by just walking us through this life journey of this ordinary man that ends up a deputy minister in Canada?
Well, that's a very long story, but I think there are certain things to observe. The most important thing is that one was born in the right family, in the right country, at the right time. My parents were entrepreneurs, so we had a certain amount of privilege. I remember they were the first people to set up a supermarket in what is known now as Chilabombo. It was bankrupt in those days. My father was the local mayor. This is before independence, but the mayor wasn't called a mayor because Bancroft was run by a management board. So he was the chairman of the management board. And by the way, he did not get paid for that. The sense of duty was very strong in those days, particularly among indigenous leaders. I remember he used his own car, he used his own fuel. And the only time that he got an allowance from the council was when he had dignitaries visiting the town, especially foreign dignitaries. And at which point the allowance would go to his office and they would organize drinks, typically soft drinks, in the mayor's parlor or in the chairman's chamber at the council. So you have that background, and I go to a school that's run by a local education authority. And that was one of the first markers, I think, in terms of developing an interest in education. First, in my first grade, against expectation, and certainly against my expectations, I came top of the entire year of the first year. That was the last time I came top, by the way. So I don't want to give the impression I was a brilliant student. Then in, I think they would now call it grade 5, I had a teacher who was very influential, Mr. Lesser. He encouraged me a great deal. And one assignment that he gave us that I remember was to write a letter applying for a job. And so I wrote this letter in English. I was very impressed with my English. Of course, the only reason my English was that good compared to the other children is I came from a home that had a library. My parents often spoke the language when they had visitors visiting. And so I was familiar with the language, and I was familiar with letter writing. In any event, for the purposes of the assignment, I did well. And what the teacher did, he noticed that my margins were not consistent. So He put a red line to say, you know, take care of your margins. But apart from that, this is a perfect letter. And he pinned it at the back of the classroom on the board as an example of how to write a letter. The effect of that was to place a responsibility on me to perform well in that subject. So my teacher, Mr. Lesser, his first name I think was Barnabas, we called him Mr. Lesser, was really a catalyst in propelling me forward in terms of my career. And then you fast forward, I am at what is now Kabulonga Boys. I was in William's house, and I was a sort of smallish chap, and small chaps tended to find ways of getting back at the bigger boys who bullied them. And I thought I would write a sort of imaginary newspaper, and you know, I did the design, and I call it the Dome 1 Times because we were in dormitory number 1. So the Dome 1 Times of William's house, I did this newspaper and wrote an opinion on people who bullied us, that sort of thing, thinly disguised. And my friend then pinned it at the back of Dome 1. Well, we left the dorm, came back in the afternoon, and there was a summons for me to see the housemaster. His name was actually John Nelson. So John Nelson called me, and we called him Bulldog, not without reason, because we thought he was quite a vicious person. And when you went to the office, typically you're going to get caned. Birching was allowed in those days. You're going to get caned. And we called a caning like that 6 of the best, because it normally give you 6 slashes. Sorry, 6 lashes. So I got this summons, and I thought, oh my goodness me, I really am in trouble. I walked in and I saw my newspaper on his desk, and I thought, this is it, this confirms it. I really am in trouble. And the first words out of his mouth removed all doubt. He said to me, Pewter, he was an English person. Pewter, I don't know what this is, whether this is another way of causing trouble or not. And then he paused. It was the longest pause, because the next thing one expected after that was, you know, you're going to get 2 lashes or 4 lashes or 6 lashes. And it was the longest pause. And then he said, well, whatever your motivation, I found the writing very good. Consequently, I have arranged for you to have access to the school Gestetner. I don't know if you remember the Gestetner. The Gestetner was this machine that printed documents. It was very inky. You put in ink and then fit the paper in a slot and turned it around, and it reproduced what you had written. So that was the beginning of a sort of newsletter that was known as the Williams House Times. And from that point, I took an interest in writing. The other thing that happened at Kabulonga was my participation in JETS. I think we were the first cohort to participate in the Junior Engineers, Technicians and Scientists organization, JETS. And a man called Nkunika, I think his first name was Dawson. He was a professor, one of the first professors of chemistry in Zambia, came to the school and wanted to tutor 2 young people. And the school chose me and my friend Inamba Francis Murieta as the 2 students. So this man would come and pick us up, take us to the university, to his lab, and he taught us chromatography. So I did 2 projects, chromatography with Inamba, and then I did another project on my own, which was about the manufacture of rayon in the lab. For that, I was supervised by Mr. Pires, our chemistry teacher. And we presented at the finals, and my project actually won first prize. So I became the first recipient, as far as I know, of the JETS award. And they gave me a cassette player, which I really valued, and I kept it for many, many years. But the big lesson from that, apart from the importance of being mentored and being tutored. Remember this man, Professor Nkunika, he was one of a kind, was one of the very first professors at the university, and he would take time out of his busy schedule to come and pick up these two young people and teach them the elements of chromatography. But the other lesson was face up to your mistake, because here's what happened. I was in the lecture theater at the University of Zambia, a very intimidating place in those days. And I was demonstrating this on the blackboard. And Nkunika is in the audience. And I sit down to say, well, that's my presentation. And Nkunika says, well, the presenter might wish to balance his equations, chemistry equations. And I stood up, faced the board, and immediately saw what was missing. There was a 2, I think, in the maybe the sodium. So I inserted the 2, and I sat down, and I thought, whew, that was a close call. Thank God he noticed it. Now, in his speech, when presenting the prizes, when it came to my prize, the first prize, the guest of honor, who was the permanent secretary for education, Mr. Dominic Mulasho, said this student was so impressive, young person. When a mistake was pointed out, he was calm about it. He looked at the equation and immediately saw what the problem was and solved the problem himself. That's what gave me the edge in that particular competition. So that was a lesson that I took with me. Now, when you fast forward in terms of my career, coming to Ontario, I ended up, when I arrived in Ontario, initially, I did not have a job. We arrived as a family, as independent immigrants. So we expected to look after ourselves, but everyone who had promised me a job disappeared. So I was on my own, really, with the family. And after 2 weeks of looking for employment, I just gave up. I went to the courthouse and registered the Chekwe consultancy. And what I then did was I would knock on doors and say, look, here's my resume or my CV. I think you will agree I have human capital. There are certain issues I can help you resolve in your organization. I'll identify the problem, I'll solve it, I'll bill you, and then I'm out of your hair. And some of them like that approach. I was very fortunate to have the Canadian International Development Agency as one of my clients. But in the course of having the Chekwe consultancy, I developed quite a network. And one day I got a phone call from the Chief of Staff of Ontario's Attorney General, who happened to be a Zambian woman who had arrived a little bit earlier than me in Canada, but she still is a very determined and aggressive woman who actually ended up in the Prime Minister's office as legal counsel. But any event in those early days, she heard about me, called me and said, look, we are looking for people of your academic and professional background to populate our agencies because we want to professionalize them. We want to take politics out of the appointment. Would you consider this? So I said, well, I will consider it, but you have to realize I've just started my firm. And she said, well, that's not a problem because it could be part-time, and then you'd simply treat us as a client. And that worked very well for me. So I applied and I was interviewed. I was successful in the competition. So I became a part-time member of the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board. And for some reason, I remembered the words of Jack Dare, who had been my partner at the law firm in Zambia, Lloyd Jones & Collins, who was a good deal older than I was. In fact, was my father's contemporary. And he'd been my father's lawyer in the 1950s. And Jack had said to me, son, wherever you go, learn something that nobody else wants to learn, but learn it really well. It will pay dividend. So I decided that advice just came to me when I took on this part-time assignment.
Wow.
So I decided to learn the Home Statute, which was the Compensation for Victims of Crime Act. I really knew it inside out. And the chair noticed that whenever we had meetings, even when I didn't say very much, the few things I said were always on point always unique, out of the box thinking. And she made note of this. So my surprise came 3 years later when she was stepping down. She called me. I was in the north of Ontario conducting hearings. She called me and said, look, I'm not going to be reappointed. They're going to advertise this position. They want to professionalize it. And I want you to apply. So I said to her, look, if they don't appoint you, why would they appoint me? Nobody knows me. I'm a non-entity in this country, for that matter, anywhere else in the world. So she said, no, you're exactly the kind of person they would want, because if you won the competition, that would prove that their competitions are merit-based. So after thinking about it, I applied, and when the results of the competition came, I was I became the first Black CEO of that organization. That was my first CEO job in Canada, outside the Chekwe consultancy. So that, you know, those are just a few highlights from my journey.
I am so thrilled. You know, kanabe sofuna chafwa ndandati. Abade kutika limbi bale mwana chitamwa mwalila bechiwemba pantu chisungu chimulira nda. Na chiba kwechaba pala, you know, pa Oxford. So mkwaentina miposha kufi mchibemba. I think for the benefit of our viewers, Mr. Chekwe is a full-blown Zambian man who I love the fact that he can go between the most proper of the English language to the most proper of the Bemba language. Ichibemba chati that how do you finish that, sir?
Well, you finish it for me.
I'm trying to make sure that I say it right. Is that correct?
It's a very profound saying, and I'm not sure what its real intent is, but I understand the purpose of that saying is to say, you do not judge a person simply in the way that they appear to present, but listen to what they are saying.
Yes.
Listen to what they are saying, and they in turn have an obligation to listen to what you are saying. In other words, go for the substance, not the superficial.
Exactly. And having said that, sir, I want to transition. We have 30 minutes. I want you to speak to the pillars, the folks that you believe have been cornerstone in the development of our nation. And in this conversation, you and I agreed that it will be people from a wide spectrum of society. If you don't mind leading us in that. But before you do so, would you just offer us what you believe in your own words is the most refined definition of leadership that you could come up with?
Leadership, you know, has many definitions, and leaders have many qualities, and that's why the term itself, leadership, has many definitions. But first and foremost, a leader is someone who promotes certain ideals. And in terms of national leadership, it's somebody who promotes national ideals and helps a nation attain its objectives. And that's loaded. That statement is loaded, because first of all, you have to know what are the national objectives. In our case, in the case of Zambia, we want to be a democratic, prosperous nation. And therefore, the leader must be able to express that sentiment and then lay out a plan which the people then approve, and that's why we have elections, to attain those objectives. The reality of Zambia, however, is we are a multi-ethnic society. And so that in itself introduces a new element in leadership, and that element is the ability to manage diversity, which in turn introduces a related element, which is inclusion. You cannot manage diversity unless you're prepared to be inclusive. So a modern leader in Zambia must not only have the ability to articulate the objectives of society, but must have the ability to lead a diverse and inclusive society to the attainment of those objectives. You know, I was listening to somebody I don't usually listen to because I have issues with him, Professor Lumumba. And he went back to Socratic thinking and identified 3 types of people in society. And he said what he called the idiots. Actually, the term is idiotess. And idiotess is from the Greek, meaning those who are uninterested in civic affairs and in politics. They're called idiotess. That's where the term idiot comes from. So you've got the idiotess. You then have the nativists. The nativists, I call them nativists. He called them tribalists. I don't like that term. The nativists only think about their immediate group, and they will do things only for their group. When they leave their group, they consider themselves to be almost in a warlike situation. They are there not to represent any genuine ideas or even necessarily themselves, but to reflect the views and represent the views of their particular group. You then have a third group of people who are in a minority in most societies, and I suspect that in today's Zambia, they're in a minority. And these are the citizens. The citizens take the interest of the whole entity, the body politic, as their interest. And the things they do while enhancing their own personal position also happen to enhance the interests of society broadly. So I introduced this element just to consolidate my definition of leadership as somebody who is capable of rallying a group of people to attain objectives, stated objectives, in the most inclusive way possible.
Wow. So, sir, we're going to acknowledge our sponsors for a little while, then we'll carry the conversation on the back end of this little break. And in conclusion, to me, leadership, as you've said, is a relationship. Inclusive, managing diverse groups of people. We're so thankful for people watching from London, from Zambia, from the United States, and we'll be back. Give us a short break, and we'll be back after the commercial.
Are you ready to explore the heart of the nation's capital? Join AZDMV and the Organization of Zambians Abroad for an exciting charter-up bus tour of Washington, D.C. on Saturday, October 26, 2024. Choose from 2 convenient tours. The first bus departs at 9 to 11:55 a.m. and the second leaves at 12 noon to 3 p.m. Pickup point is the Hilton Garden in Arlington Shirlington Hotel. We'll visit 4 iconic sites: the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, the White House, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Washington Monument, giving you the full DC experience. For just $50. Secure your spot and make lasting memories. For inquiries, contact Richard at +1 443 455 0455 and pay via Cash App or Zelle at azdmvunitedstates@gmail.com. Don't wait, seats are limited. Book your seat today, and let's tour DC together. AZDMV's got you covered. We're here to make sure you have an unforgettable experience.
Welcome back, welcome back. Mr. Puta, please, the pillars of our great nation.
In terms of personalities?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, we instinctively go to political leaders because they have convinced us over the years, and this is what ails our country, that nothing matters except politics. But a lot of things happen, a lot of things matter. Politics is just one of them. So when I talk about the pillars, I want to talk about people who have had an influence in a large number of areas, including politics. I would say, excuse me, I would start with one of the most underrated contributors, and that's Donald Siwale. Donald Siwale basically is the father of civil society in Zambia and the pioneer of sort of civil service excellence in the country. I wish we could talk more about him, and I wish we would emulate him more than we do. You've got people like Whittington Sikalumbi, who actually, together with Simon Mwansaka-Pwepwe, was responsible for the very name Zambia. You see, Whittington Sikalumbi thought the country should be named Zambezia. And Zambezia was an ancient empire, which included territory that is now called Zambia. Zambezia's fame is that in 900 AD, the country declared that the king had to govern with equity. And this was one of the first times in human history when a society is concerned about equitable governance, which we now think is a new concept, but in fact it goes back to 900 AD. There is an interesting book written on this by an Arab who actually visited, oh no, he spoke to people who had been to Zambezia, but he himself had been studying societies on the east coast of Africa. And Zambezia was an example that was being given as a country that knows how to govern. His name was Al Masood. So Donald Suwale, I go back to him as a pioneer. Whittington Sekalumbi, who said, our country should be called Zambezia. And then Simon Kapwepo said, well, Zambezia is cumbersome. Why don't we just truncate it to Zambia? It's much more euphonious. And so we became known as Zambia. Other heroes, I talked a moment ago about Professor Dawson Nkunika, a chemist, Professor Lamek Goma, the first Black vice-chancellor of the University of Zambia. Now, his strength lay in the fact that he was very disciplined and he was not obsessed with people's ethnic or linguistic backgrounds. He simply looked for excellence. And he took over from Professor Doug Anglin, whom I knew. He had worked with my father on when my father was raising funds for the University of Zambia. But going back to Goma,
so I'm going to have to, what? I'm going to have to speak a little bit quickly on raising funds for the University of Zambia. I don't think a lot of Zambians know this story about how we fundraised to build our first university, if you don't mind, sir.
Yeah, well, I remember as a child, a lot of politicians came home. I remember Mr. Sikota Wina was a regular visitor because his constituents was actually in Chilabombo. Mr. Finance Bulawayo, Mainza Chona, Simon Kapwepwe, Dingiswao Banda was a very close friend of my father's. And each time they came, they'll be talking about how they wanted to build a university for their children. Our children must have a university. And you see, when independence came, they said, well, you always talk about this, so you find the money. And he was on the, I think they call it transitional council. I'm not sure, it may have been the Senate. In any event, he was on that governing body. And he was given the task of raising money for the construction of the university on the Copper Belt, not the Copper Belt University, but to raise funds on the Copper Belt. Was the chief fundraiser. And what he did was to hold a number of events to raise money for the university. And he committed his own business. A certain percentage of the earnings from his own companies went to this effort. So he was responsible for the Copperbelt province. The other significant fundraiser was Abe Galoon. Abe Galoon was also a significant fundraiser, but he tended to go beyond Lusaka and became almost a de facto national fundraiser minus the Copperbelt. So that University of Zambia was built as a result of the will of Zambian leadership, as a result of the efforts of Zambian entrepreneurs and patriots. They drove the idea. And I think that's one reason it had relative success. The most successful ideas almost always come from within.
Well, you know what, having said that, I think Kwangu Liwewe has a question for us. And she's saying, picking up on your comments, as African countries, including Zambia, continue to navigate democracy, do you believe the Western model has truly served us, or should we consider developing a uniquely African form of governance that aligns with our culture's heritage and history?
Democracy has a context, but there are certain things that are inescapable if you are going to be a democracy. People must choose their government freely. And you cannot choose your government freely unless people are allowed to form themselves into political parties or organizations and to campaign freely. That will happen wherever you are. Secondly, the respect for human rights is universal. There is no such thing as African human rights or Asian human rights, or American human rights. It's all human rights. For example, I have never come across a person or a group of people who enjoy being beaten up. I've never come across a group of people who enjoy being imprisoned. I've never come across a group of people who enjoy being silenced. The desire to speak freely, the desire to move freely, the desire to organize freely, those are human desires. So to that extent, the principles of democracy are universal. However, there is a context. If you look at the politics in your part of the world, it seems to be fashionable to be abusive. Abuse is considered a suitable substitute for analysis. That cannot be the case. That would differ in our culture in Zambia, where we emphasize respect. For example, young people are respectful to the elders. The elders in turn reciprocate by paying due respect even to young people, even though the young people are not culturally entitled to that respect. That's our culture. That must be reflected in our politics. So our dialogue must be measured. There is another aspect, freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is not an invention of the West. I'll give you an example from the Luba cultures, and the vast majority of Zambian ethnic groups have a connection to the Luba kingdom. This idea came from the Congo state, where the king was advised that he had to be informed. He had to know what was happening in the kingdom. And the only way he could really know what was happening in the kingdom was by being given a frank assessment of what was taking place in the kingdom, nothing filtered or sanitized. And for that reason, the office of Ingomba developed, it emerged. And the Ingombas went around the kingdom with their people, listened to the people's complaints. And in many communities, they did not even identify themselves. So people did not know what their role was. But at the end of the day, they would gather all these concerns and then compose poems or songs to be performed for the king, so that the king knows what's going on in the kingdom. And they were encouraged to be candid, because under the rules in Luba jurisprudence, you could not penalize Ingomba for doing their job. They had total immunity from prosecution.
So they were like tenured professors.
That's how freedom of speech was promoted. So yes, Mr. Liwewe is quite right. We do have traditions that are really worth remembering and incorporating into our constitution. Yeah.
So that was Miss Liwewe. You know what?
Liwewe, yes.
I'm sitting here, sir, scratching my head. We've gone through 6 leaders that you identify as pillars. How can we not have the father of our nation as some of these 6 or 7 gentlemen that you've mentioned? I think every Zambian would say, Mr. Puta, ngaba, lesa panwe sonde, whatever was said before. How could we not mention that man as a pillar so far in this conversation?
Oh, no, I did not mention all the pillars. You remember, you interrupted me when I was going through my list.
I apologize.
And I was focusing on people who have not been celebrated adequately.
I see.
Yeah, like Donald Suwale and Whittington Sikalundi and Titus Mukupo, Lawrence Katilungu. Harry Mwangankumbula has been celebrated, but not nearly as much as he should be. There was far more substance to Harry Mwangankumbula than people realize, because the fashion after independence was to glorify only those who were in power, which means to glorify President Kaunda and the few selected people. But we should not underestimate the contribution of Harry Mwangankumbula or Mbikusitele Wanika.
Oh, wow.
These are great leaders that we should celebrate. But you see, going back to, since you have identified President Kaunda as a pillar, President Kaunda was a brilliant campaigner for Zambia's independence. He knew how to communicate with the colonial powers in a non-threatening way. And with respect to the local population, he depended very much on Simon Kapwepwe for effective communication to the local population. So because of that partnership, the local population did not punish Kaunda for cozying up with a settler community, because they had the reassurance through Simon Kapwepwe that he was even more concerned about the interests of the local population. That was a partnership that worked very well. President Kaunda's mistake, however, was to rely on the same skills that he used to campaign for independence when he became prime minister and president. He was not a good economics manager. He continued to make extravagant statements. He continued to believe that political directions, political commands could actually alter an economy. He did not understand adequately how the market worked. So in the ideal world, and with the benefit of hindsight, what he should have done was to serve for one term and to have seen himself as a transitional leader. If he had done that, that would have created the space for Zambia to really consolidate its democracy, because then that would have given an opportunity to people like Arthur Wina, Elijah Mdenda, Simon Kapwepwe, you name it, to actually run for president, do their time, leave, and then somebody else. That culture and that tradition would have been established. So my criticism is that the skills that President Kaunda had to prosecute the campaign for independence were inadequate for the purpose of running the country as chief executive officer. So that was Kenneth Kaunda. Frederick Chiluba became president as a reward for never having been a UNIP leader or an official in UNIP. When it came to power, the country was so fed up with UNIP that they were really looking for someone who was the cleanest. And by clean, they meant the person least associated with UNIP. And that's how Chiluba came to power. And I'll give him credit. His first term, I think, was superb. He was a true reformer. We forget that before the MMD government, we used to line up for things like toilet paper, even mealie meal. You had these cases.
I remember that.
You had these cases of at least one child being killed in a stampede for bread, that sort of thing. All that ended after the Chiluba government's reforms. And when I say Chiluba, I really mean his team, because for the first time in a long while, we actually had a team of people running Zambia. And that made Chiluba a stronger leader. You're talking about our traditional saying just a moment ago. And Chiluba understood that, that it was not just him. It had to be a team. And if you had a solid and capable team around him, he himself would then really become quite grand. And that's how he governed, at least in the first term. You then had Levi Mwanawasa, an accidental president, perhaps, but the one most committed to the campaign against corruption. And that's what he'll be remembered for. Unfortunately for him, corruption actually increased under his rule. But it increased not because he was corrupt. As I explained to him in a number of times, it really used to upset him when he saw the rankings for Zambia under the perception of corruption index. It used to upset him that Zambia wasn't really making more progress. But as I explained to him, the effects of corruption are cumulative and they are ongoing. So a corrupt act would take place in year 1, but its real impact comes up in year 3, at which point the regime has changed. It's not the new regime's fault. This problem goes back a few years ago. So overall, I think Levi Mwanawasa would be seen as a campaigner against corruption. And I think he was also committed to national unity, as Chiluba had been. Chiluba and Kanda were very committed to national unity. I think Levi Mwanawasa too was committed to national unity. And Levi Mwanawasa recognized talent. He's the only president to have sought this young fellow whose name escapes him. His last name is Mumba. I think his first name is Charles Mumba. This is a fellow who does not have a university degree, but is a born scientist. When his parents retired and they went back to Mporokoso, he went with them. They had no electricity, but there was a waterfall in the area where they had moved to. And he noticed that there was an old broken down truck. So he took a diff from there, made a turbine, and used the waterfall to generate electricity for them. This is talent that every Zambian should be talking about, but we don't because, we're not accustomed, I suppose, to praising ourselves. However, President Mwanawasa sought this person out and honored him duly. So President Mwanawasa deserves credit for that. You then have Mr. Rupia Banda. I will tell you, Rupia was a relation by marriage. His first wife was my cousin. And one of the most accessible presidents, I think, in the world. And he was so likable. And he used that, I think, to enhance the interest of the country. And there was a certain amount of prosperity that the country enjoyed under Rupia's leadership. So I give him credit for that. The downside of the Banda, I think, presidency is similar to the downside of the Lungu presidency, which is lack of supervision of ministers, adequate supervision. But at least Banda was well-meaning. He understood compromise, and I think he had a better understanding of business than many other presidents. You then had Michael Sata, who had a terrific record as governor of Lusaka and minister of health. We forget now when we drive along Los Angeles Boulevard that was a single-lane road when Sata first went into the city council as the head, as a governor. He somehow found the funds to turn that into a dual carriageway. And also the flyover, over the railway line.
That's correct.
That ends into Cairo Road. Those things were built at a very difficult time, because when Sata became governor of the city council of Lusaka, or Lusaka Urban District Council, as they called it during the one-party years, the council was actually broke. It had a huge deficit generated by an equally large debt. But when he left, the council actually had a surplus. That's the kind of manager that he was. And you saw this commitment to excellence in hospitals and clinics as well during his tenure as health minister. And Mr. Sata was succeeded by President Lungu. The downside of the Sata presidency is that he went into office ill, and therefore we did not see that excellence with which we associated him in his previous roles come out when he was president. And unfortunately, he died in office, and Mr. Lungu came along. Mr. Lungu basically, I think, was a very good tactician, but a poor strategist. So he went for short-term wins. He was a kind of person who was good at winning the battle, but could also be counted upon to lose the war.
Lost the war.
And the reason, one of the reasons for that is he was a poor supervisor of his ministers. His ministers would get themselves involved in unconstitutional behavior, even downright illegal behavior. This would be reported to him, and his solution would be to pick up the phone and ask the minister, "Is it true that you're doing this?" That really is no way to govern as president. And then, of course, after President Lungu, we have the current regime, and we have to wait until their term is over for us to give a fair and more comprehensive assessment of Mr. Hichilema's rule.
So, we have 5 minutes left. And, I love what you said. We shouldn't be defined by politicians. There's people like Mr. Tom Motini, whom you do know. There's people out there that have been major contributors, good civic stewards of our country. But then the question I have for you is, why would you put the picture of Parliament on the book Pathway to Excellence if you're saying politics is not the answer?
No, politics is the answer, but we should not exaggerate the importance of politics.
I see.
Yeah, and the importance of Parliament on the cover of Pathways to Excellence is this: laws emanate from Parliament, and if Parliament had the will to decentralize power, power would be decentralized and will get closer to excellence in those circumstances.
That makes sense.
Yeah, for example, we complain about each government, and we shall continue to complain about each government until we resolve the structural problems with our society. And the structural problems are, first and foremost, that the president, the chief executive officer in Zambia, has too much power. For example, it makes no sense that the president of the republic, who is also president of a political party, should appoint the head of the Electoral Commission. That is the equivalent of asking one of two competing football teams to choose the referee.
So, Mr. Puta, on that one, we have to invite you again, because that's a very broad topic. You know what, sir? The bakery in Luanshya just burnt down last night. The fire brigade had no water. I just got this on my text. Isn't that, you talk about systems, But what I wanted you to conclude with, because we're running out of time, sir, is something you said, that Zambians need to go back and it's almost like fall in love with ourselves again, understand our history. I would like for you to conclude this, to give us a hopeful message of how we start to go back. It's almost like what T.S. Eliot says, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. How do we go to this place where we started and build back from there, where we actually have self-worth and self-love as a people?
We must remember that the eye cannot see what the mind cannot comprehend. So we need to train our mind to comprehend certain things. We need to destroy certain assumptions. For example, if I were to say to the average Zambian person, the Zambian army should prepare to be the largest and most efficient, not the largest, but the most efficient and effective army in the world, that would just go over their head. But if I were to say to them, look, in the 1500s, Portugal mounted a surprise attack on the Congo state. The Congo state was caught unawares, but within a week, they regrouped and they defeated the Portuguese army. That becomes a lesson. We've done it before. It can be done. If I go back to them and say, all right, let's talk more broadly about the African continent. In the year 1200, the best universities in the world were Al-Qaran, I think they now call it in Morocco. It was Timbuktu, and it was Jenne, and the other one was Bologna. Only one of them was in Europe. The other three were in Africa. The richest country in the history of the world was Mali, which is now one of the poorest countries in the world. The richest man in the history of the world was Mansa Musa, whose net worth in today's terms was $400 billion. You start pointing these things out to Zambians, also as Africans. It will help them liberate themselves mentally, and it will give them the confidence to forge forward. Zambia has the potential to be the greatest country in the world, in the sense of having the most agreeable people, having the strongest economy, and having the most humane society, and having the best ability to defend itself and help other countries. Aid is not for us. We should be giving aid to the rest of the world.
Derek's response is, why isn't this insightful knowledge documented? And that's why we're doing what we're doing. Sir, if you were to build, I'm going to end with this. If you were to build one statue one statue of a Zambian hero that is missing, which statue would that be, and of who?
That's a tough one. I would probably go back to history and do the statue of Mbemba Nzinga, who, as the Portuguese called him, his actual name was Mbemba Nshinga, because he established excellence in medieval times.
Okay. I thought you'd say Elliot Mulenga, who I've learned about from you, who was a miner, and that's a story for another day. I believe it's Elliot Mulenga.
Elliot Mulenga will be one of the heroes, no doubt about that.
Yes, sir. No, thank you so much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please Google Mr. Chisanga Puta Chekwe and all the material and the work that he's done, an academic, a scholar, an entrepreneur, and just a humanitarian. And please join Zambia Blog Talk Radio today at 12 Central for another program. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day. Mr. Chekwe, any last words, sir?
Let's believe in Zambia. Zambia has a long way to go, but how successful it becomes depends entirely on the Zambians, not on foreigners. It depends entirely on Zambians.
Thank you so much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. One Zambia, one
nation indeed.
Zambia's 60th independence is here. Are you ready to celebrate in style? Get your exclusive and wear your style of Zambia at 60 t-shirts and proudly stand out. Show your love for Zambia with a design that's bold, unique, and perfect for this special day. One shirt is just $40 or grab two for $70. It's the perfect way to share the pride with friends and family. Ready to order? It's easy. Send your payment via Zelle, +1 817 501-1615 or Cash App, $Pastor Nate. For questions, email us at zbtr2009@gmail.com. Don't wait, pre-order now, wear your style, and let's celebrate Zambia's freedom in style.
Zambia Blog Talk Radio.